Buongiorno a tutti ragazzi, this is Luca, professor of history and enthusiast of Italian culture, and today we talk about 5 differences between Italians and Italian Americans. I'm here in front of the so-called Squared Colosseum or Palace of the Italian Civilization to talk about the first difference between Italian and Italian Americans. This was a monument mostly to the Italian diaspora between the 1880s and the 1920s. And so this is a perfect place to talk about geography, the first major difference between Italian and Italian Americans. What I mean by that is that when I was in the US, I noticed that most of the Italian Americans that I met, that I talked to, they were not aware of the fact that 95% of Italian Americans came from a specific part of Italy, which is southern Italy. And that gave Italian American identity and culture a specific Italian, southern Italian culture, which is quite different from, for example, central Italy, where I'm from, or even more northern Italy. So what Americans and Italian Americans perceive as a general Italian culture in the US is, in reality, way closer to the southern Italian identity. In fact, Italian American food, last names, language, culture, and also stereotypes are way, way closer to southern Italian culture than to the rest of the Italian peninsula. This is because, again, the Italian diaspora in America was specific from southern Italy. And this is not true for every country in the American hemisphere. For example, Brazil or Argentina, those are countries in which there are as well gigantic Italian communities, but they're mostly from northern Italy. In fact, I want to make a video about that. And their culture is completely different. You would not recognize them, identify them as Italians as you would do with Italian Americans, because the fact that they are mostly from northern Italy makes them culturally, linguistically, very, very different. And this is something that makes a huge difference between Italian and Italian Americans of the US, an important difference.
The second topic I want to talk about today is a very controversial one: food. The difference between Italian food and Italian American food. This is something that I've already touched a little bit in my first video called What Americans Get Wrong About Italy, so I leave the video in the description down below. But I want to talk about this because, not because I'm an expert of food, not because I want to claim authenticity of Italians over Italian food, absolutely not. I know this is a very sensitive topic for Italian Americans, but here I'm just telling my experience as an Italian who ate Italian American food in the United States, and so I just want to tell you guys what were my impressions. And my impressions are that Italian and Italian American food are completely different. This is for two major reasons. The first being that Italian American food throughout the generations was deeply influenced by the American tradition. It was influenced both because of the different taste that Americans had and still have compared to Italians when it comes to eating, but also because of the very scarce availability of ingredients that back in the day Italian Americans had. So they had to prepare food from the Italian tradition, but with many American ingredients, and this changed these foods completely compared to what they were used when they were in Italy in their youth. Okay, so this is very important in my opinion. And the second reason why Italian and Italian American food are so different, this is very interesting. Recently, an Italian professor of food history known as Alberto Grandi, I leave the article in the description down below, posted this article in which he basically says that the real Italian food is more the food of immigrants in the Americas, such as Italian Americans, than the food that Italians in 2024 eat in Italy. And this created a mayhem, an insane chaos in Italy. Now everyone in Italy hates this guy. His theory is that Italian American food, many of these foods are very authentic of the Italian traditions of, for example, farmer foods, and they're absolutely 100% Italian, even more than today's Italian food. And a great example of this is the so-called pasta Alfredo. Pasta Alfredo, Italians say, is not Italian. That's not correct. It is Italian, but no one, zero people in Italy eats Alfredo sauce on the pasta today, because as many other Italian foods from the 1800s, it disappeared in the Italian tradition while it was maintained in the immigrants in the Americas. So in Italy, if you want to go and eat the Alfredo sauce, the authentic one, you have to go to a specific restaurant in the city center of Rome, but I mean, no one go there, not standards Italian. It's just a very niche experience, but 99.9% of Italians, they don't even know that Alfredo sauce exists unless they have been to the US or they're used to the American culture. So here again, no one is claiming authenticity over Italian food. I'm just telling you the reality, guys. Italian food and Italian American food are completely different. Now I want to talk about a topic that I have already touched in my first video, which is family. But I want to focus more on the specific differences between Italian American and Italian families. Now, my experience when it comes to this topic is this. Italian American families, and I met many of them during my PhD in the US because my PhD involved Italian American stories. Italian American families still maintain some aspects of the familiar tradition of Italians. For example, they are more in contact between multiple generations compared to the standard American pattern in which once you go to college you lose a lot of contact with your family of origin. Or, for example, your grandparents in the, let's say, standard American families, they go to this nursing home in Florida or New Mexico and you basically don't see them anymore. I noticed that in Italian American families, again, the ties between generations are in general closer compared to the standard American family. But I have to say that also when it comes to this topic, Italian Americans have Americanized a lot, and this is absolutely normal after generations being raised in America. So, for example, compared to the Italian family, Italian Americans leave their original household much before, way before than Italians. Again, they go to college and then they leave their original family and maybe they study and then they build their own family on the other side of the country. That's very typical. While in Italy, you tend to remain with your family, living with your parents up until your 30s, and even when you leave your original household, you tend to create a family close to your original one. I'm a typical example of this. I am in my mid-30s, I have 2 kids and a wife, I have my family, but I live basically in the same property, the same building as my 92-year-old grandmother and my parents. And this is quite normal in Italy, where again family ties are incredibly close, but for 2 reasons mostly. The first one is that especially in the recent past, now is a little bit better, for Italians to build their own family there were a lot of economical struggles. Finding a house, finding a job, you can maintain an entire household. It was and still is not easy. And also again there is this cultural aspect, which in my opinion is the most important one when it comes to understand why Italians are so close to their family of origin. There is this cultural aspect that you remain, let's say, so close and loyal to your original relatives for the rest of your life. And this is something that Italian Americans, and that's perfectly normal, it's not a bad thing, they have lost a little bit. Now their families, the structure of the families is a little bit more similar to the standard American one. And family is connected to religion. And this is something that even in my experience in the US, I noticed that there is a huge difference between Italian and Italian Americans. Why? Because again, Italian Americans, most of them have been in the US for now more than a century, and so the different religious feelings of standard American compared to standard European and Italian influenced Italian Americans a lot. And this is pretty straightforward. Italian Americans are in general way more religious than Italians. Again, I know that this is a shock for many Americans because they associate Italy with the church, the Pope, St. Peter, but as I told you guys before in the first video, Italians now are among the least religious people in Europe. Young Italians, they don't care anymore about religion, while Italian Americans, many of them being American and also having maintained the tradition of their grandfathers who emigrated from Italy with a deep Catholic faith, they are in general still way more religious than Italians.
The last aspect, the last difference I want to talk about today is something that I really care a lot about because it really took my attention, but I think many Italian and also Americans do not know anything about this difference, and I'm talking about patriotism. Now, when I was in the US, I noticed that Italian Americans are in general, of course there are differences, but they are in general very patriotic. They care a lot about the United States, they care a lot about their flag. Many of them were in the army or in the Navy. They have this feeling of America first, that America has to be the first power in the world. This is in general a typical aspect of the American civilization, and Italian Americans that meld a lot with the American values throughout the generations now are among the most patriotic Americans you can find. And for them, I think it's quite shocking to know that Italians are the complete opposite. Italians are the least patriotic people in Europe, and Europe is the least patriotic continent in the world. Recently, there was a survey, an important survey that really took my attention. The question was, if your country was attacked by a foreign power, would you die to defend it? Now, the country that by far has the lowest percentage of people answering, yes, I would defend my country to death, is Italy. 22% only answered yes, while, for example, Americans were above 60%. In general, Europe was low, but Italians were by far the lowest percentage in defending their country. And this is a typical part of our culture. We love singular aspects of the Italian identity, such as food, traditions, monuments, but as a national patriotism, we are completely different from America. We absolutely don't care about our national values, our position in the world, defending our country. We are the opposite of Americans, and so also Italian Americans are completely different from Italians. Italians would never find some topics that Italian Americans love about patriotism. They would never find them interesting because, I might say unfortunately, but it depends on the perspective, many Italians just don't care about patriotism. This is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please subscribe and let me know in the comments if you like this kind of content.